Arthur laughed off the idea of any trouble at home. "My children are safe with Mrs. Albright." Then he opened his front door, and a child's whispered plea froze the very air around him, changing everything forever. The polished mahogany door of the grand estate swung inward with a soft sigh, revealing the familiar opulent foyer that usually greeted Arthur Hayes with an echoing silence. Today, however, a faint, unsettling sound drifted from deeper within the mansion, a fragile whimper that was quickly stifled, followed by a low, stern murmur he couldn't quite place. Arthur, a man whose life was a meticulously orchestrated symphony of board meetings, international travel, and strategic investments, had returned a day earlier than anticipated, a rare deviation from his rigid schedule prompted by an inexplicable tug at his heart, a quiet whisper of unease he had initially dismissed as travel fatigue. He stood there, his expensive briefcase still clutched in one hand, the scent of fresh lilies from a nearby arrangement doing little to soothe the sudden chill that snaked its way up his spine, a premonition that felt as cold and sharp as a winter's blade. His footsteps, usually confident and resonant, now felt heavy and hesitant as he moved further into the house, following the almost imperceptible sounds. The afternoon light, usually a golden cascade through the tall arched windows, seemed muted, casting long, disquieting shadows across the marble floors. He found Lily, his 6-year-old daughter, huddled by the closed door of the nursery, her small frame trembling, her usually bright eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears. Her little hands were pressed against the polished wood, as if trying to absorb some hidden pain from within, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The sight of her, so small and vulnerable, struck Arthur with a force that knocked the air from his lungs, a visceral ache blooming in his chest. He knelt, dropping the briefcase with a thud that seemed to reverberate through the silent house, his voice a mere whisper as he reached out to her. "Lilybug, what is it? What's wrong?" he asked, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet dread. Lily turned to him, her face a crumpled mess of fear and sorrow, her lower lip quivering uncontrollably. She lunged into his arms, burying her face into his expensive suit jacket, her tiny voice muffled but distinct, a desperate, childlike plea that tore at the very fabric of his being. "Daddy, please, please make her stop. Make her stop hurting Leo. She locked him in again." The words, fragmented and raw, landed like blows, each one echoing the growing horror in Arthur's mind. He held her tight, his gaze fixed on the closed nursery door, a cold, unyielding rage beginning to simmer beneath his carefully constructed composure, a primal instinct awakening within him. Just then, the nursery door creaked open, and Mrs. Albright emerged, her uniform impeccably pressed, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, a serene, almost beatific smile gracing her lips. She carried a small embroidered cloth, dabbing at her brow, as if she had just finished a strenuous but rewarding task. Her eyes, usually warm and crinkling with a grandmotherly affection, seemed to hold a fleeting, sharp glint as they met Arthur's stunned gaze, a flicker that vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an expression of mild surprise. "Mr. Hayes! What a delightful surprise to have you home early," she purred, her voice a smooth, practiced melody that instantly grated against Arthur's raw nerves. "I was just settling little Leo down for his nap. He's been a bit fussy today. Bless his heart. Lily, darling, why are you clinging to your father like that? Such a dramatic little thing. Always so sensitive, isn't she, Mr. Hayes?" Her words were laced with a saccharine sweetness that now tasted like poison, a stark contrast to Lily's desperate plea still ringing in Arthur's ears, a chilling dissonance that sharpened his burgeoning suspicion. Arthur, a man of immense wealth and influence, had built his empire on logic and calculated risks, yet his personal world had remained tragically fractured, since the departure of his beloved wife, Eleanor, during the birth of their second child, Leo. The loss had hollowed him out, leaving an emotional void he attempted to fill with work. His success, a glittering facade over a desolate inner landscape. He adored his children. Lily, a vibrant 6-year-old with her mother's bright spirit, and baby Leo, a fragile infant who represented both a new beginning and the enduring ache of his past. But his grief had cast a long, isolating shadow, rendering him somewhat detached, a benefactor more than a fully present father. Mrs. Albright had been a fixture in their lives for years, a seemingly indispensable presence, a comforting, grandmotherly figure who managed the household with an efficiency that bordered on perfection. She had offered solace in his darkest hours, her unwavering dedication a balm to his guilt-ridden conscience for his frequent absences. Yet, in that moment, as he held his trembling daughter, her words of sensitive and dramatic felt less like reassurance and more like a subtle, insidious dismissal, a veiled attempt to diminish Lily's truth. The image of Mrs. Albright, with her perfectly pressed uniforms and comforting demeanor, now seemed to warp and twist in his mind, revealing a hidden, unsettling edge. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that something was terribly wrong, and his detached world was about to be irrevocably shattered. Arthur's grip on Lily tightened instinctively, a silent promise forming in the depths of his soul as he looked up at Mrs. Albright, her perfectly composed face a mask he now saw through with chilling clarity. The saccharine sweetness of her voice, once a comforting balm, now felt like a silken trap, each word a carefully placed thread in a web of deceit. He managed a strained smile, a performance he hoped concealed the tempest brewing within him, the raw fury that threatened to erupt. "Indeed, Mrs. Albright," he said, his voice a little rougher than he intended, "Lily has always been a sensitive spirit, much like her mother. Perhaps a little overtired from my unexpected return." He rose slowly, still cradling Lily, his eyes never leaving the housekeeper's, searching for any telltale flicker, any crack in her flawless facade. He noticed the way her gaze, though seemingly placid, darted almost imperceptibly towards the nursery door, a subtle shift that spoke volumes to his newly awakened suspicion. He walked towards the nursery, Mrs. Albright following a step behind, her presence a heavy shadow. The room, usually bathed in soft, playful hues, felt strangely cold, the air thick with an unspoken tension. Leo lay in his crib, a tiny, vulnerable bundle, his cheeks still flushed, a faint tremor running through his small body even in sleep. Arthur's heart constricted as he gently touched his son's forehead, feeling a slight dampness, a residual feverishness that Mrs. Albright had dismissed as mere fussiness. He noticed a faint, almost imperceptible red mark on Leo's wrist, partially hidden by the sleeve of his sleep suit, a mark that could be anything, a tiny scratch, an innocent brush against the crib bars. But now, in the harsh light of Lily's words, it screamed danger. Mrs. Albright, ever vigilant, stepped forward, her hand moving to adjust Leo's blanket, her movements swift and precise, almost as if to obscure Arthur's view, her voice a low murmur about a difficult day with the baby's teething. That night, sleep offered no refuge for Arthur. Lily's words echoed relentlessly in his mind, intertwining with the image of Leo's flushed face and the faint mark on his wrist. He found himself wandering the silent halls of his mansion, a phantom of his former self, his mind racing through every interaction, every dismissed cry, every instance where Mrs. Albright's seemingly impeccable care had perhaps masked something far more sinister. He remembered how Lily had become increasingly withdrawn in recent months, her vibrant laughter replaced by a quiet solemnity, her once eager questions now rare and hesitant. He had attributed it to the lingering grief of Eleanor's departure, his own emotional distance inadvertently creating a chasm between him and his children, a guilt that now gnawed at him with relentless ferocity. He cursed his blindness, his preoccupation with business, his inability to see beyond the surface of a meticulously kept home and a seemingly devoted caregiver. Over the next few days, Arthur began to observe Mrs. Albright with a meticulousness that would rival any corporate audit. He noticed the subtle tightening of Lily's shoulders whenever the housekeeper entered a room, the way Leo would sometimes whimper softly when Mrs. Albright approached his crib, only to immediately quiet when her gaze met his. He saw the way Mrs. Albright's smile, so warm and genuine in his presence, would sometimes falter, replaced by a fleeting expression of irritation or coldness when she thought herself unobserved, particularly when addressing the children. The pristine order of the house, once a source of comfort, now felt like a meticulously constructed cage, designed to hide the truth within its polished walls. He began to check the nursery door after she had settled Leo for his nap, finding it occasionally locked from the outside, a small, discreet latch he had never noticed before, a detail that sent a fresh wave of ice through his veins. One evening, as Arthur was helping Lily with her bedtime story, he noticed her flinch almost imperceptibly when Mrs. Albright's shadow fell across the doorway. Later, after Lily was asleep, he returned to her room, drawn by an inexplicable urge. Tucked beneath her pillow, he found a small, crumpled drawing. It was a crude depiction of a tall, imposing figure with a stern face and exaggerated, angry lines, holding a small stick, towering over a tiny, weeping figure. Next to the drawing, in shaky, childlike script, were the words, "No more bad lady." A cold dread settled deep in Arthur's chest, solidifying his fears into a horrifying certainty. This was not the innocent imagination of a sensitive child. This was a desperate cry for help, a silent testament to a hidden pain. The weight of his past absences pressed down on him, a crushing burden of regret. He remembered Eleanor, her keen intuition, her gentle strength, and her unwavering devotion to their children. He recalled a conversation they had, months before Leo's arrival and her own tragic departure, where she had casually mentioned a slight unease about Mrs. Albright's overly possessive nature towards Lily, a fleeting thought Arthur had dismissed as new mother's anxiety. Now, that forgotten whisper echoed with chilling significance. He began to search through old boxes, photo albums, and even Eleanor's personal effects, a desperate hope blooming within him that she, in her infinite wisdom, might have left him a sign, a clue, anything that could help him unravel the dark tapestry Mrs. Albright had woven around his family. He needed to find the truth, not just for his children, but for Eleanor's memory, to honor the love she had instilled in their home, a love he now realized he had taken for granted. Arthur's search through Eleanor's belongings became a desperate pilgrimage through the remnants of a life he had cherished and inadvertently neglected. He sifted through photo albums filled with sun-drenched memories, delicate trinkets, and stacks of letters, each one a poignant whisper from the past. He sought not just a memory, but a revelation, a breadcrumb trail Eleanor might have left in her prescient wisdom. Deep within an old cedar chest, beneath layers of cherished baby clothes and forgotten keepsakes, his fingers brushed against a slim, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with time. It was Eleanor's diary, a private sanctuary of her thoughts and observations, a place where she had recorded the mundane joys and subtle anxieties of her life. His heart pounded as he opened it, a profound sense of intrusion mixing with an even stronger surge of hope. He devoured the entries, each word a step closer to understanding the woman he had lost and the truth he desperately sought. Amidst loving descriptions of Lily's first steps and hopes for Leo's future, a recurring name began to appear with increasing frequency: Mrs. Albright. Eleanor had initially praised her efficiency and dedication, but as the entries progressed, a subtle shift in tone became palpable. One passage, dated just weeks before Leo's arrival, sent a jolt of ice through Arthur's veins. Eleanor had written about Mrs. Albright's strange possessiveness, a chilling entry detailing how the housekeeper had subtly tried to dissuade Eleanor from hiring a new night nurse, insisting she alone could provide the unwavering care the children needed. She had also noted Mrs. Albright's unusual interest in the family's financial affairs, disguised as concern for the children's future, a detail Eleanor had dismissed then as harmless curiosity, but which now screamed with ominous intent. Armed with these unsettling insights, Arthur's observations of Mrs. Albright sharpened into a laser-like focus. He began to notice the almost imperceptible ways she would subtly undermine Lily's confidence, praising her achievements with a backhanded compliment, or gently correcting her in a way that left the little girl's shoulders slumped. He saw how she would isolate the children, always ensuring they were engaged in separate activities, never allowing them to play together unsupervised for long, a tactic that fostered a quiet dependence on her alone. The locked nursery door became a more frequent occurrence, a cruel ritual that left Leo crying himself to sleep, his small whimpers muffled by the thick wood, sounds Mrs. Albright would dismiss as necessary for establishing a routine. Arthur's guilt deepened, a heavy, suffocating blanket, as he realized how easily he had been manipulated, how his own grief had created the perfect blind spot for such insidious cruelty to take root. He started spending more time at home, consciously scaling back his business commitments, much to the subtle annoyance of Mrs. Albright, who seemed to view his presence as an inconvenient disruption to her carefully constructed routine. He would sit with Lily, reading her favorite stories, his voice a comforting rumble she had missed, and slowly, timidly, she began to open up, not with words, but with her actions. She would lean into his touch, her small hand seeking his, a desperate need for connection that tore at his heart. He would hold Leo for hours, cradling his tiny body, whispering soft reassurances, feeling the warmth of his son against him, a bond that was slowly, painstakingly, being reforged. It was during one of these quiet moments, as he was gently rocking Leo, that he noticed another faint bruise, a small discoloration on Leo's delicate thigh, too perfectly round to be accidental, too dark to be ignored. Mrs. Albright, ever watchful, had quickly attributed it to Leo's clumsy crawling, her voice calm and reassuring, yet Arthur saw the fleeting, almost imperceptible tension in her jaw, the way her eyes darted away, betraying a flicker of unease. The subtle confrontations began, veiled exchanges where Arthur would ask seemingly innocuous questions about the children's day, probing for inconsistencies, observing Mrs. Albright's reactions. Her answers were always smooth, perfectly rehearsed, a tapestry of half-truths woven with practiced ease. Yet, the more he questioned, the more he saw the cracks in her facade, the micro-expressions of annoyance, the slight tightening of her smile. He started setting up small, discreet cameras, disguised as decorative objects, strategically placed in the children's rooms and play areas, a desperate measure born of a father's growing fear and an unyielding need for irrefutable proof. He needed to expose the darkness that lurked beneath Mrs. Albright's polished exterior, to bring to light the malicious intent that Eleanor had, in her own quiet way, begun to perceive, a truth that now haunted his every waking moment. He would not rest until justice was served, and his children were truly safe, their shattered trust painstakingly rebuilt with the unwavering strength of his love. The digital eye, hidden within the ornate patterns of the children's rooms, began to record, capturing the mundane and the monstrous with equal unblinking clarity. Arthur, a man accustomed to deciphering complex financial reports and predicting market fluctuations, now found himself poring over hours of footage, his office transformed into a silent war room, illuminated only by the cold glow of a monitor. Each evening, after the children were asleep and Mrs. Albright had retreated to her quarters, he would begin his vigil, his heart a leaden weight in his chest, dreading what he might uncover, yet compelled by an unshakable resolve. The first few days yielded little beyond the expected, Mrs. Albright performing her duties with the same impeccable efficiency, her smile seemingly genuine, her movements graceful and assured. But Arthur knew, deep in his gut, that the truth lay hidden beneath this polished veneer, a dark current flowing beneath the placid surface. Then came the moments that shattered his carefully constructed denial. Piece by agonizing piece, he watched, horrified, as Mrs. Albright, believing herself unobserved, would enter Lily's room after a minor disobedience, her face contorted into a mask of cold fury. She wouldn't strike, not in the way one might expect, but her words, delivered in a low, venomous whisper, were far more insidious. She would tell Lily that her father was too busy, too important, to care about her little troubles, that her mother's departure was a burden Arthur carried because of Lily's own fussiness, planting seeds of self-doubt and guilt that burrowed deep into the child's tender psyche. He saw Lily's small shoulders slump, her vibrant spirit dimming under the weight of such cruel manipulation, her eyes welling with silent tears that she quickly learned to hide. Arthur felt a searing wave of pain, a profound regret for every moment he had been absent, for every time he had believed Mrs. Albright's assurances that Lily was merely sensitive. The footage from Leo's nursery was even more chilling. He witnessed Mrs. Albright gently place the baby in his crib for a nap. Then, once she thought the door was securely closed, her demeanor would shift dramatically. The soft coos would vanish, replaced by a harsh, impatient shushing. He saw her deliberately ignore Leo's cries, sometimes for extended periods, leaving the infant to sob himself into exhaustion, his tiny fists beating weakly against the mattress. He saw the swift, almost imperceptible pinch to Leo's arm when the baby continued to fuss, a sharp, calculated gesture designed to leave no lasting mark, but to inflict immediate pain and fear. The faint bruise on Leo's thigh, which Mrs. Albright had attributed to clumsy crawling, was revealed to be a deliberate, forceful squeeze captured in stark, undeniable detail. The locked nursery door, a cruel mechanism to ensure Leo's isolation and silence, was now a recurring nightmare playing out on his screen. As Arthur continued to watch, the motive began to emerge, insidious and cold. He caught Mrs. Albright on a phone call, her voice hushed, discussing the will and the children's trust fund, expressing frustration about unforeseen obstacles and the father's sudden presence. She spoke of the family's vast estate, of Arthur's immense wealth, with an avarice that chilled him to the bone, revealing a deep-seated resentment beneath her polished exterior, a belief that she was somehow entitled to a share, perhaps even control, of their fortune. She saw his grief-stricken detachment not as a weakness to be pitied, but as an opportunity to be exploited, a path to financial gain. Her dedication had been a performance, her grandmotherly affection a carefully crafted illusion, all designed to secure her position, and ultimately, her claim on a future she believed was hers. The weight of this revelation settled on Arthur like a shroud, suffocating him with a fresh wave of guilt. He had been so blind, so consumed by his own sorrow, that he had handed his children's well-being, their very innocence, to a predator disguised as a caregiver. He watched the footage again, searching for any sign, any flicker of humanity, but found only cold calculation, a ruthless determination to isolate his children, to break their spirits, and to manipulate their father, all for the sake of material gain. He realized that Eleanor's subtle unease, her fleeting comments about Mrs. Albright's possessiveness, had been a desperate warning, a mother's intuition sensing the darkness that Arthur, in his emotional fog, had failed to see. The truth was a bitter pill, but it also ignited a fierce, protective fire within him, a burning resolve that would not be extinguished until justice was served. He would spend his days quietly observing Mrs. Albright, her saccharine smiles and practiced platitudes now sounding like nails on a chalkboard. He would hold Lily close, stroking her hair, whispering words of unwavering love and reassurance, slowly, painstakingly, coaxing her out of her shell. He would spend hours with Leo, cradling him, singing soft lullabies, rebuilding the shattered sense of security that had been so cruelly taken from his infant son. The children, still wary, still bearing the invisible scars of their ordeal, began to respond, their small hands reaching for his, their eyes, once dulled by fear, slowly regaining a flicker of their innate brightness. Arthur was no longer just a wealthy CEO, he was a father, raw and exposed, but fiercely present, ready to fight with every fiber of his being for the innocent lives entrusted to his care. The evidence was undeniable, the truth laid bare, and the time for action was drawing near. The digital eye, hidden within the ornate patterns of the children's rooms, began to record, capturing the mundane and the monstrous with equal unblinking clarity. Arthur, a man accustomed to deciphering complex financial reports and predicting market fluctuations, now found himself poring over hours of footage, his office transformed into a silent war room, illuminated only by the cold glow of a monitor. Each evening, after the children were asleep and Mrs. Albright had retreated to her quarters, he would begin his vigil, his heart a leaden weight in his chest, dreading what he might uncover, yet compelled by an unshakable resolve. The first few days yielded little beyond the expected, Mrs. Albright performing her duties with the same impeccable efficiency, her smile seemingly genuine, her movements graceful and assured. But Arthur knew, deep in his gut, that the truth lay hidden beneath this polished veneer, a dark current flowing beneath the placid surface. Then came the moments that shattered his carefully constructed denial, piece by agonizing piece. He watched, horrified, as Mrs. Albright, believing herself unobserved, would enter Lily's room after a minor disobedience, her face contorted into a mask of cold fury. She wouldn't strike, not in the way one might expect, but her words, delivered in a low, venomous whisper, were far more insidious. She would tell Lily that her father was too busy, too important, to care about her little troubles, that her mother's departure was a burden Arthur carried because of Lily's own fussiness, planting seeds of self-doubt and guilt that burrowed deep into the child's tender psyche. He saw Lily's small shoulders slump, her vibrant spirit dimming under the weight of such cruel manipulation, her eyes welling with silent tears that she quickly learned to hide. Arthur felt a searing wave of pain, a profound regret for every moment he had been absent, for every time he had believed Mrs. Albright's assurances that Lily was merely sensitive. The footage from Leo's nursery was even more chilling. He witnessed Mrs. Albright gently place the baby in his crib for a nap. Then, once she thought the door was securely closed, her demeanor would shift dramatically. The soft coos would vanish, replaced by a harsh, impatient shushing. He saw her deliberately ignore Leo's cries, sometimes for extended periods, leaving the infant to sob himself into exhaustion, his tiny fists beating weakly against the mattress. He saw the swift, almost imperceptible pinch to Leo's arm when the baby continued to fuss, a sharp, calculated gesture designed to leave no lasting mark, but to inflict immediate pain and fear. The faint bruise on Leo's thigh, which Mrs. Albright had attributed to clumsy crawling, was revealed to be a deliberate, forceful squeeze, captured in stark, undeniable detail. The locked nursery door, a cruel mechanism to ensure Leo's isolation and silence, was now a recurring nightmare playing out on his screen. As Arthur continued to watch, the motive began to emerge, insidious and cold. He caught Mrs. Albright on a phone call, her voice hushed, discussing the will and the Children's Trust Fund, expressing frustration about unforeseen obstacles, and the father's sudden presence. She spoke of the family's vast estate, of Arthur's immense wealth, with an avarice that chilled him to the bone, revealing a deep-seated resentment beneath her polished exterior, a belief that she was somehow entitled to a share, perhaps even control, of their fortune. She saw his grief-stricken detachment not as a weakness to be pitied, but as an opportunity to be exploited, a path to financial gain. Her dedication had been a performance, her grandmotherly affection a carefully crafted illusion, all designed to secure her position, and ultimately her claim on a future she believed was hers. The weight of this revelation settled on Arthur like a shroud, suffocating him with a fresh wave of guilt. He had been so blind, so consumed by his own sorrow, that he had handed his children's well-being, their very innocence, to a predator disguised as a caregiver. He watched the footage again, searching for any sign, any flicker of humanity, but found only cold calculation, a ruthless determination to isolate his children, to break their spirits, and to manipulate their father, all for the sake of material gain. He realized that Eleanor's subtle unease, her fleeting comments about Mrs. Albright's possessiveness, had been a desperate warning, a mother's intuition sensing the darkness that Arthur, in his emotional fog, had failed to see. The truth was a bitter pill, but it also ignited a fierce, protective fire within him, a burning resolve that would not be extinguished until justice was served. He would spend his days quietly observing Mrs. Albright, her saccharine smiles and practiced platitudes now sounding like nails on a chalkboard. He would hold Lily close, stroking her hair, whispering words of unwavering love and reassurance, slowly, painstakingly, coaxing her out of her shell. He would spend hours with Leo, cradling him, singing soft lullabies, rebuilding the shattered sense of security that had been so cruelly taken from his infant son. The children, still wary, still bearing the invisible scars of their ordeal, began to respond, their small hands reaching for his, their eyes, once dulled by fear, slowly regaining a flicker of their innate brightness. Arthur was no longer just a wealthy CEO. He was a father, raw and exposed, but fiercely present, ready to fight with every fiber of his being for the innocent lives entrusted to his care. The evidence was undeniable, the truth laid bare, and the time for action was drawing near. Arthur's resolve hardened with each passing day, the video evidence burning a hole in his conscience. He knew he couldn't delay. The safety of his children, and the memory of Eleanor, demanded swift, decisive action. He felt a profound shift within himself, the detached CEO replaced by a primal protector. His first move was to quietly contact a trusted legal team, emphasizing the utmost discretion, describing a sensitive family matter involving a caregiver and a potential threat to his children's well-being and inheritance. He shared selective details, enough to convey the gravity, but holding back the raw footage for a more controlled reveal. The lawyers, accustomed to high-stakes cases, understood the need for meticulous planning. He also reached out to an old family friend, a retired child psychologist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, who had known Eleanor well. He explained the situation, his voice thick with emotion, and she agreed to discreetly observe Lily and Leo, offering a professional assessment that would corroborate his findings. Dr. Reed's gentle approach quickly gained Lily's trust, and through play therapy and quiet conversations, the psychologist began to piece together the fragments of Lily's unspoken fear, observing the subtle anxieties and withdrawal that pointed unequivocally to emotional distress. Lily, still hesitant to explicitly voice her pain, would draw pictures of a dark cloud over her house, or small figures huddled in corners, mirroring the emotional isolation Mrs. Albright had imposed. The atmosphere in the mansion grew heavy with unspoken tension. Mrs. Albright, sensing a shift in Arthur's demeanor, became subtly more agitated, her perfectly composed mask cracking at the edges. She would cast suspicious glances his way, her smiles becoming brittle, her movements a fraction too quick. One evening, Arthur decided to push, to test her confidence. He found her in the drawing room, meticulously dusting a porcelain figurine, her back to him. "Mrs. Albright," he began, his voice calm, yet carrying an undertone of steel. "I've been reviewing some of Eleanor's old journals. She had some interesting observations about the household, and indeed, about certain individuals within it." Mrs. Albright stiffened, her dusting cloth pausing mid-air. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something cold and calculating passing through them before she regained her composure. "Oh, Mr. Hayes, Eleanor was a dear woman, always so observant, a true lady of the house." Her voice was smooth, but Arthur detected a faint tremor, a barely perceptible tension in her jaw. "Indeed," Arthur continued, stepping closer, his gaze unwavering. "She also expressed some concerns about the children's well-being, particularly regarding their emotional state, and a certain possessiveness she perceived." He watched her closely, noting the way her knuckles whitened as she gripped the figurine, her serene expression now a fragile veneer. "Possessiveness? Oh, Mr. Hayes, I only ever had the children's best interests at heart," she purred, her voice dripping with feigned hurt, a practiced performance of injured innocence. Perhaps Eleanor, God rest her soul, was simply a little overwhelmed during her pregnancy. New mothers can be quite sensitive, can't they? The casual dismissal of Eleanor's intuition, coupled with the veiled condescension, ignited a fresh spark of anger within Arthur. He took a deep breath, maintaining his outward calm. "Her concerns were quite specific, Mrs. Albright, and I have, shall we say, found corroborating evidence that suggests her observations were not only accurate, but perhaps even understated." Mrs. Albright's eyes widened slightly, a genuine flash of alarm breaking through her carefully constructed facade. She took a step back, her hand involuntarily reaching for the small silver locket she always wore around her neck, a nervous gesture Arthur had never seen before. "Evidence, Mr. Hayes? Whatever could you mean?" Her voice was still controlled, but the underlying fear was palpable. "Let's just say," Arthur replied, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone, "that the walls of this house have a way of remembering things, Mrs. Albright, and sometimes those memories are recorded." He saw her face drain of color, her perfect composure finally shattering, replaced by a raw, naked fear that contorted her features into something ugly and desperate. This was the moment. The confrontation escalated quickly. Mrs. Albright, realizing her carefully constructed world was crumbling, lashed out, her voice rising from its usual smooth cadence to a shrill, venomous shriek. "You think you know something, you arrogant, grieving fool? You were never here. You were always too busy with your precious money, leaving those children to me. I raised them. I deserved more. Eleanor was weak, and you were blind." Her words, spewed with years of pent-up resentment, confirmed Arthur's worst fears, revealing the true depth of her malice and her twisted sense of entitlement. The mask was off, and the predator stood exposed. Arthur felt a chilling mix of vindication and profound sadness, realizing the monster he had unwittingly allowed into his home. The path to justice, though painful, was now clear. He had the evidence, the testimony, and most importantly, the unwavering resolve of a father protecting his young. Mrs. Albright's words, sharp and venomous, hung in the air, a chilling echo of years of hidden resentment and avarice finally unleashed. Her face, once a picture of serene composure, was now contorted with a raw, ugly rage, her eyes burning with a hatred that solidified Arthur's resolve. He watched her, not with anger, but with a profound sense of sorrow for the lost years, for the innocence she had stolen, and for the trust she had so cruelly betrayed. He knew this was the moment, the inescapable truth laid bare, and there was no turning back. With a calm that belied the storm raging within him, Arthur simply nodded, his gaze unwavering, a silent acknowledgment that her reign of terror was irrevocably over. He had already made the necessary arrangements, his legal team and the authorities alerted and waiting for his signal, prepared to act with the discretion and swiftness required for such a sensitive family matter. Within moments, the quiet dignity of the Hayes mansion was pierced by the hushed, professional movements of uniformed officers. Mrs. Albright, still reeling from her outburst, initially attempted to regain her composure, to revert to her practiced facade of injured innocence, but the sight of the officers and Arthur's unyielding gaze shattered her pretense completely. She railed against him, her accusations growing wilder, her voice cracking with a desperate fury, claiming persecution and betrayal. But her words now carried no weight, only the hollow resonance of a desperate, cornered predator. Arthur watched impassively as she was escorted from the home, her once perfectly pressed uniform now seeming to sag, her silver hair disheveled, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. A profound silence descended upon the house once she was gone, a silence that felt both heavy with the ghosts of past suffering and light with the promise of a future free from fear. The ensuing weeks were a whirlwind of quiet, methodical action. Arthur's legal team, led by a compassionate but formidable woman named Ms. Davies, worked tirelessly, compiling the overwhelming evidence. The video footage, stark and undeniable, became the cornerstone of their case, revealing Mrs. Albright's calculated cruelty, her psychological manipulation of Lily, and the physical neglect and subtle abuse inflicted upon baby Leo. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the child psychologist, provided her expert testimony, detailing the emotional distress and behavioral changes she had observed in both children, corroborating Arthur's findings with precise clinical observations. Her gentle, empathetic approach had allowed Lily to slowly, timidly articulate her fears, not always with direct words, but through drawings and play that vividly depicted her distress and Mrs. Albright's intimidating presence. Lily, though still fragile, found a newfound courage, her small voice, guided by Dr. Reed, becoming a powerful testament to the hidden suffering she had endured. The formal proceedings, though emotionally draining, were handled with the utmost care to protect the children. The court, presented with the irrefutable video evidence, Eleanor's journal entries hinting at Mrs. Albright's true nature, and the children's carefully gathered testimonies, quickly moved towards a judgment. Mrs. Albright, stripped of her carefully cultivated image, attempted to maintain her narrative of being a dedicated caregiver, a victim of a grieving father's delusion and a sensitive child's overactive imagination. She tried to discredit Arthur, painting him as an absentee parent, a man too consumed by wealth to notice his own children, but her arguments crumbled under the weight of the undeniable proof. The cold, calculating avarice revealed in her phone calls about the trust fund, coupled with the stark images of her cruelty, left no room for doubt. When the judge rendered the verdict, finding Mrs. Albright guilty of abuse and manipulation, a wave of profound relief washed over Arthur. It was not a moment of triumph, but of somber justice, a recognition of the wrong that had been done and the truth that had finally prevailed. Mrs. Albright's final outburst in the courtroom was a pathetic display of unrepentant rage, her voice shrill as she screamed accusations, blaming everyone but herself, her face a mask of bitter resentment, her carefully constructed illusion utterly shattered for all to see. Her punishment, a sentence that ensured she could never again harm a child, marked the end of her manipulative reign, bringing a closure that was both necessary and deeply deserved. Arthur held Lily's hand tightly as they left the courthouse, the weight of the world feeling a little lighter, the path to healing now truly open before them. The justice sought was not merely punitive, but restorative, clearing the way for a future where love and truth could finally flourish, unchecked within the walls of their home. 2 years later, the grand Hayes mansion, once shrouded in a pall of grief and silent fear, now vibrated with a different kind of energy, a warmth that permeated every sunlit room, chasing away the lingering shadows. Arthur, no longer the stoic, emotionally distant CEO, moved through its spacious halls with a lightness in his step, his eyes reflecting a deep, abiding peace. He often found Lily, now a radiant 8-year-old, tending to a small rose garden they had planted together in the backyard, her small hands carefully pruning the delicate buds, a testament to the growth and care she now received. Her laughter, once hesitant and rare, now rang out freely, a clear, joyful sound that filled the air, and her bright eyes, once clouded with unspoken fear, sparkled with an innocent curiosity and a profound trust in her father. Leo, a boisterous and happy 3-year-old, chased butterflies across the manicured lawn, his baby fat replaced by sturdy limbs, his tiny voice babbling with unadulterated delight, his past ordeal a distant, fading echo in the vibrant tapestry of his new life. Their evenings were filled with simple, cherished rituals. Dinner around the large mahogany table, once a somber affair, was now a lively exchange of stories and gentle teasing, Arthur listening intently to every word, his heart full. He would read bedtime stories to Lily and Leo, their small bodies nestled close, feeling the warmth of their presence, the soft rhythm of their breathing, a constant reminder of the precious lives he had fought so fiercely to protect. The invisible scars of their past lingered, perhaps, in quiet moments of reflection, but they were fading under the relentless sunshine of unconditional love, replaced by the resilience that only a parent's unwavering presence could foster. Arthur had not only brought justice to a dark situation, but had found his own redemption, shedding the armor of grief to become the steadfast protector and loving father Eleanor had always known he could be. He had learned that true wealth lay not in fortunes amassed, but in the laughter of his children, the touch of their small hands, and the quiet comfort of a home rebuilt on truth, courage, and boundless affection. The Hayes family, once fractured by loss and betrayal, had blossomed anew, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to heal and thrive. Their story reminds us that even in the deepest sorrow, there is hope for renewal, and that the shadows of deceit cannot withstand the illuminating power of truth. What would you do to protect a child, to mend a broken spirit, or to rebuild a family shattered by unseen cruelty? Share your thoughts, and remember, the kindness we extend, the courage we find, and the unconditional love we offer are the truest foundations of justice and well-being in a world that always needs both. The greatest battles are often fought in the quiet corners of our homes, and the greatest victories are won with a heart full of love.